So, welcome to another episode of Sermon for One. And today I have a special guest. I've known Bob for several years now. We
Yeah,
respect. We're part of a small group of Christian leaders, business leaders that meet that have like a every week meeting Fridays.
yeah,
I love that group because we start talking sometimes things that are just very mundane things, very normal things like football, sports, and politics. And then all of a sudden, we're so deep in theology and in counseling one another that it's a
yeah.
wonderful fellowship that we have there. So, how are you doing today, Bob?
I'm doing great, Jonathan. Great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to share this time with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, I would never be able to give justice to give you an introduction. So, would you share a little bit
Mm.
about yourself and especially about IBEC Ventures and what you're involved with?
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, I'm just blessed to be here. I'll tell you a little bit about myself personally. Most important part, I've been married for almost 33 years now. Just been blessed to have my perfect mate, and she's just my inspiration. We have two daughters, and now we have two little grandsons, and so just a season of life. I think that I just feel like I got to make every day count. That God has given me this tremendous life, and I can't even begin to repay Him for what He's done for me. So, but I'm sure going to do my best to live each and every day for Him. And that's what it's all about. So live in the States here, but I travel a lot. Go to many parts of the world that have, I think, and we'll probably talk a little bit about this, that have really opened my eyes.
Mhm.
I mean, you can read about poverty, you can think you have a sense of it, but then when you see it firsthand and you meet the people that are being impacted by it, it breaks your heart. It broke my heart the first time I went to some of the places that I go to, and you just want to help the people. And so I just feel blessed to be in this role, leading IBEC Ventures. IBEC Ventures, we started back in 2006. We provide coaching and consulting primarily for businesses in what everyone calls the 1040 window, kind of the unreached people group
Mhm.
areas of the world, areas where missionaries can't go in many cases. So, how do we get the gospel in there? Well, people need jobs. And so, we're all about building and growing sustainable businesses. Um, and we just try to come alongside businesses and make sure that they are profitable and sustainable, but also make sure that they've got a ministry plan, that there's an intentional mindset in making disciples for Christ. And so that's what we do at IBEC. We've got about 35 coaches, and we probably work with 50 to 60 businesses. But my background was really in life sciences, biotech. When I got out of college, I fell into that world and never had any idea that I'd be doing this. In fact, when they first reached out to me to see if I was interested in leading IBEC Ventures, I said, I think you got the wrong guy. I'm I'm not a pastor. I'm not a missionary. I'm a business guy. Um, and I think for a lot of the men and women out there that are hearing this right now, I think that's a normal response from business people. Is that's not my role. You know, God didn't wire me that way. And then I kind of peeled back the layers on IBEC Ventures and what God had done to me as far as just putting an opportunity like this on my heart. And I said, you know what, I'm in, and kind of jumped in the deep end and fell in love with what we do and the organization, the people I work with, and the people that we get to come alongside out there. So that's a little bit about myself.
That's good. Yeah, it's when I first when I first got into our BNB group, I think one of the things that shocked me the most was the existence of IBEC venture type of companies, Third Path Initiative, um, Thrive Venture as well.
Yeah.
Because I come from a slightly different background. Not slightly different, it's almost the opposite. So I come from the ministerial background
Mhm.
and was trusted into the corporate world. And to be honest, a lot of us we have like people who do ministry that have businesses, but never really did I expect or see or know that there would be like support companies that are thinking about
Yeah.
supporting these
Yeah.
people. And I think that my company started in 2018. I met you guys in 2021. So for the first 3 years, there was, though God was giving success for us, it still felt alone a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
when you go to clients, when you present your business, sometimes it feels like I was very intentional about putting. I am a Christian. We have Christian principles. We're very intentional because I came as a pastor's background, right? So I said,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to deal with anything that's weird. But but when I found out about you guys, and you guys actually helped me a lot, through organizing my business and opening my eyes
Yeah.
and how it's structured. It's really amazing that these things exists. And when we started talking about the different companies that you've helped in are all around the world, right? You have
Yeah.
the companies in
Yeah.
the Philippines that you help, Indonesia, and etc. So it's such a blessing to when sometimes when you go to different houses and you open a door and there's a whole room you know that you've never
Yeah.
seen. I think
Yeah.
that's how I felt when I found out about IBEC Ventures. So you have a lot of businesses that you currently help, and what is one of the biggest challenges, do you think, for Christian businesses as they either start? What do you think is a challenge there?
Boy, Jonathan, there's so many challenges out there, as you know, leading your business. I think just a couple things that immediately come to mind. I think first and foremost is it's really really hard to do this by yourself. It's hard to do it alone, and what I mean by that is you really need a network. When you're talking about kingdom businesses, I think it's really imperative that you have a network of believers, in that same proximity of where you're at, so that you can
Hmm.
actually bounce ideas off of one another. And then also what we do is, we bring a coach alongside those folks, and so having that person that you're accountable to in a good way, and they're accountable to you, and you can really walk this journey with somebody, I think is really critical. I think so I think, the thing I tell people right off the bat is, don't do this alone. I mean, we will get you into a network. We will introduce you to a lot of people that you don't know, and a lot of people that are going to be strong encouragers of the path that you're on, because many of them have done it already, or they're on in the same boat as you are. I think that's one that immediately comes to mind. I think the other thing too is, entrepreneurs, practitioners, men and women who start companies, right? They're wired differently. I mean, they
Hmm.
they are gifted in so many different areas, but the area that they're probably the most gifted in is strategically. They see things a lot of times, 3, 5, 7 years down the road before many other people see them, and they just have these visions, and they just have these ideas that are just flowing, and that's a really good thing, is to have those ideas. However, the execution of the plan is probably the thing that is a challenge for a lot of the entrepreneurs that we work with. If you find an entrepreneur, a leader of a company, who can think strategically and execute tactically, you've got a really really special person, because most of the time those two things don't work together. And
Hmm.
so the execution of the plan, if it's not the founder, if it's not the practitioner who's leading the organization, who's the visionary, they've really got to have somebody come alongside them who's looking at the numbers day to day, who understands the expenses, who understands the cost structure, who understands the margins, who really understands the execution of the plan. And I would say that operational component is probably the thing that most of the businesses need the most help with, is just having somebody really challenge them on the numbers, challenge them on their marketing strategy, challenge them on their sales strategy, because it really comes down to generating revenue, right? I mean, we've got to generate revenue, we've got to be profitable, we've got to be sustainable. And so understanding the kind of the commercial, flow of the business is really important. So I think those are the things. The other thing too, we work with a lot of expats,
Hmm.
that I mean, you wouldn't believe it. I'll talk with, men and women who are just, they have these great intentions. I'll be talking to them this week, and they're deciding that, in 2 weeks they're going to a part of the world they've never been before. They want to start a business, or maybe they went there on a mission trip, and they really haven't done the due diligence on that area at all. They don't understand the market. It's kind of a ready, fire, aim mentality. And anytime I've got an expat that we're working with, we really want to make sure that they've invested in the culture. They understand the culture that they're going to be part of, that they're going to be living in, and they've taken it time to understand and learn the language. If you don't know the language and you don't take time to understand the culture, it's really, really hard to start a business in a foreign country. And so anytime we've got expats who have been in country for a number of years, their family this is their home, they're embedded in the community. The kids are in the schools. This is the foundational piece that they built in their life. That's always a huge plus, when you're talking about expats. And then when you're talking about nationals, you've got other challenges as well. But I think the execution, the operational component, is probably the thing that is the biggest challenge for most of the businesses that we work with. Yeah.
I think I think that really resonates with me because my business is mostly related to services and outsourcing
Yeah.
that we do.
Yeah.
And as we started my business, one of the things that I had the vision, I had the understanding, but I also was
Yeah.
the best executor as well. So I was the one that
Mm,
executed the
yeah.
best. And I think that it was a challenge for me to find somebody so that I could keep my vision and keep us moving
Yeah.
forward. But and now that we do some outsourcing and some VA, I see a lot of our clients that are business owners and business people that they also have a vision and they're just like a tornado going straight. They go
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
everything, and they just need people that are picking up the pieces and arranging things as they
Yeah.
trailblaze a path for the business. It was for a long time, Bob. It was a challenge for me to build that team that could understand the vision and keep to the principles that I wanted and the values that the company, the culture that I wanted
Yeah.
my company to have, but they would be able to execute and also at least see, if I'm seeing 7 years like you said, did at least see half of that so that they
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
where the direction. It was very, very difficult. And that sort of brings me to the thing, because that was for a few years, that was the thing that I was searching for. I'm super glad my team right now is a solid team. But
Yeah.
that was sort of my sermon for one, per se, for a long
Sure.
time. That And as I was talking to leaders in business, as leaders in the churches as well, a succession plan is important. Succession plan,
Yeah.
which means put away your pride, right? Put
Yeah.
away pride, put the cap of understanding, because a lot of people are going to fail in trying to fulfill that position. and
Yeah.
and that was sort of a big struggle, especially letting go, letting go of decisions and things like that.
Yeah.
So the podcast is a sermon for one. Do you have anything that is very particular to you right now, very close to you right now, in terms of a passage, a story, or a concept that you've been thinking about for the past few weeks or months?
Well, I've kind of got I've got a verse that just kind of, it's lived with me, or I've lived with it for many, many years. And it's something that I like everybody, I'm sure, out there. I've got my prayer list in the morning, and go through the, everybody that I really try to cover every day with prayer. But I always resonate back to Psalm 37:5 as well. Commit thy way unto the Lord, trust in him, and he shall bring it to pass. And that's been a verse that's been with me for many years, Jonathan. Because what it tells me there is that, there's some key parts of that verse that are applicable to me every day. First of all, I've got to commit to him, got to commit my day to him. I've got to commit my life to him. I've got to commit everything I do today, to him. And so there's that commitment right up front. I think then the second piece of it is I've got to trust him. I've got to trust that once that commitment is made, that I'm in his hands, and that's, I wouldn't have it any other way. And then certainly, some of the challenges I know that I've gone through in the past, in my life, and we continue to go through them. I mean, that's what life's all about. I really believe that it's a moment in time that it will pass, that everything we do, God has His hand on it. We want it to end, especially if we were going through a valley. We want it to end like yesterday.
Hmm.
Um, Today at the latest, and it may be tomorrow or many days from now when it does end. But that passage just has so much of my life wrapped around it, that's the one that I live and breathe by, because it touches so many different parts of my life, over the years. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that because right before this recording, I just jumped off a call, and I spoke because about we were talking about the person I was talking to. We're talking about being patient in the Lord, and
Mm,
and the verses
yeah.
and the Lord will come to pass, which gives reference to time.
Yeah.
The one thing that we have to understand really is that our God is an eternal God, and time is a different concept for Him. So
Yeah.
sometimes when He's
That's right.
working in us, we think that I think I can work this for 3 months, and then in God's mind,
Yeah.
could be 15 years before.
Yeah. Totally.
So
Yeah.
and and being patient and trusting, I think that is one of the big things. Which brings me to a question for
Yeah.
you, is that how does it work, or how have you seen it work or play out when you have people that are non pastors, non missionaries, and then they get into the business mission space, or you get like people who are from the business side, and then they start thinking more on a mission sort of
Yeah.
concept. Which one is the most difficult to
Ooh,
to
boy.
cross over?
Yeah, it's boy, that's a great question. I think it's really, really hard for a pastor or a missionary who's got these amazing. They've got gifts. You've got gifts, Jonathan. You happen to, you're a unique individual because you're a hybrid. You've done both. I mean, really, that's a
Mhm.
really a testament to the gifts that God has given you, because that's not the way it typically is. I mean, a lot of times in the past, I remember there have been missionaries and pastors who have been given this really, really difficult, almost impossible task to go out and start a business, you
Mhm.
know, um, in the middle of nowhere, with no support, with no training, no equipping, no coaching, and no capital. You know, it's like, okay, how in the world am I going to start this business? I've never done this before, and I'm really not equipped. I don't have the resources to do it. And unfortunately, that really became a discouragement, I think, to a lot of the folks that were in the trenches doing that, and then others that kind of watched this from afar and said, "Man, I don't know if this business's mission thing is going to take, because here's a couple of examples that haven't." And so, if we're working with a pastor or a missionary who wants to start a business, we're not going to come in and say, "No, you can't do it because you're a pastor or a missionary," right?
Mhm.
But they really need to know what they're signing up for. They really have to know that this is not going to be a Monday through Friday job. It's not going to be a 40-hour work week. From running your business, I know what time of the day you're on the calls with us all the time, middle of the night. And, you're talking 60, 70, 80-hour weeks are not uncommon. So they really need to know what they're signing up for. Now, I will say that there are pastors and missionaries that have been gifted. They're wired for business. I mean, you're wired for business. When you asked me initially about what are some of the greatest challenges, what maybe is one of the main reasons that some of the businesses fail, it's the execution of the plan. It's the operational component. You jumped right in and said, I like that. I was on the front lines. I was closing deals. I'm still doing it. That's a beautiful thing, because you know exactly what's happening in your business on a day to day,
Mhm.
but from a day to day function. That's very uncommon. So I would say that asking a pastor or missionary to start a business without adequate support and not really doing your due diligence to uncover whether they're even wired for business or not, or they're ready to go down this pathway, I'd say that's really, really difficult. Now, is it on the other side of the equation? I'm a business guy. So, okay, so
Hmm.
now so how do I make the jump over to okay, focusing? You know, my background is commercial. It's a number. It's living and breathing a
Hmm.
number for 30 years. That's what I did, and it was all about return, and it was all about profitability, and it was all about bringing value to the you know to the shareholders for a particular company, any company that I was with. That may have been the case, but it was all about driving a number. For
Hmm.
profit. So now when I shift over to business's mission, how do I take some of the learnings that I've got that I think can help businesses, but how do I never lose sight of the fact that the business is the ministry? And so for me, like when I'm working with clients, every call, I've got my agenda for the calls, I've got my notes, and
Hmm.
on every call I've got discuss the ministry plan. And that's as much for me as it is for the client, because I can camp out on the business side of the ledger all day, but that's not why we do this. And so I have to really make sure that I have an intentional focus on the ministry plan, and I'm over on that side of the ledger too, because that to me is the most important. So I would say they're both more difficult. I would say probably the one that we run into more often is the pastor or missionary who wants to start a business, for all the right reasons. They want to be able to support the people in their community, they want to provide jobs. They want to do the things that businesses can, in fact, create. But we got to make sure they've got the support to do that. And we can't just jump in and say every one of them is going to be in a position where they're going to be successful. There will be some that are, but there's a lot of them that just have never done this. It'd be like asking me to go plant churches in India. I go to India, I work with businesses, but asking me to go plant churches in some of these areas, I would have no idea what. Now I do my best, and I'd be praying about it, but I don't have the background to do that. And so to me, that's similar to some of the positions that we put some of these ministry leaders in, really, really difficult ones, I think.
Yeah, I agree, because I think that that was the biggest challenge that I had when I started working. So this is
Yeah.
not even owning a business, just working in
Hmm.
corporate, was that there's this stigma that you no longer have faith, because
Yeah.
you're supposed to. The, I don't know other countries. My listeners might are from all around the world, but uh, there is here in the Philippines, for example, especially in our circles, uh, a pastor is not supposed to necessarily be live a comfortable life. It's almost like we have to suffer for Christ. We have to be the example of somebody that has long
Mm.
suffering, patience, and things like that. And those are normally not associated with living comfortably.
Yeah.
And there's a whole other set of reasons why I'm against that. But there's
Yeah.
that stigma, and it's difficult. Another one is what you just said about being prepared and having the tools.
Yeah.
When I
Yeah.
started working in corporate, and eventually started my own business, I started appreciating numbers,
Yeah.
appreciating Excel tables, and how
Mhm.
to understand trends, and understanding how to create processes, how important it is, how to be consistent in those processes, to create systems that are scalable. Those kind of words
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
not words that I learned as a pastor. And uh, looking back from the business perspective, looking into ministry, whenever I have ministry, I am now thinking about how can this scale, marketing wise, how can we make this a visible ministry that people can see, that they
Yeah.
can support.
Yeah.
Um, you know and I think that the biggest challenge there is, and I think that that's a problem that the church is experiencing right now. I spoke with a couple of pastors, and I said, hey, do you have feedback on your sermons? Does anybody give you feedback on the sermons? Because i
Yeah.
i, I I went to the church, and I said, oh
Uh-huh.
man, I could give some feedback here, just so to help. help
Yeah.
help the
Sure.
church.
Yeah.
And or even, do you have data on attendance, right? Do you know how many
Yeah.
people are attending? And if there's a there it drop the attendance drops on a specific week or specific month, do we know why it's dropping,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that, and I told them, there are tons of people in your congregation that I personally know will know how to do this for you, how can
Yeah.
improve the ministry for you. And on the other side as well, I feel lonely sometimes if I don't attend the BNB session, because I then don't have any people that are in business that are Christian that can give me good advice. I could
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
reach out to other people that are non-Christians that they can give me business advice, but most of the advice will say, "Hey, that principle that you said that you have to pay people fairly, or that you have to pay your taxes correctly, or whatever. You can switch things a little bit here and there." And that's the person. Do you
Yeah.
have any problems with any people that you guys coach where situations like that happen, where uh, you have somebody that has a business background that is having hard time keeping the moral standards correct, or you and then you have the people on the Christian side, not Christian, but the mission side, where they don't price things correctly, for example, like, this is
Yeah. Yeah.
this is too cheap, or things like that. Do you have is that a common thing that you experience with coaching
Oh
BNB?
yeah, I think what you said just now. I mean, the whole idea of one of the things that we're really big on, Jonathan, and think about your business before you started, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you identified, the first thing you got to do is you got to identify a problem or a need, right, in the market. There's got to be a pain point out there that you know about, that because you're a consumer, there's something that God has wired you, so you're looking at it, you're saying, I can do better than that. This is
Mm-hmm.
wrong. Here's a need. Here's a problem. Okay, so that's the first thing you got to do, and then the second thing you got to do is you've got to develop a solution that's
Mm-hmm.
going to address that need. Sounds pretty basic, right? So I'm be surprised at how many businesses don't really do that, but
Don't have a solution.
that's kind of the first thing. If there's not a need and there's not a solution that I've identified, then I probably don't have a business. I probably don't have a product or a service. Those are two things. Now, the third piece of it is the one that this is the one that kind of feeds into it. And this kind of goes to your question about pricing and understanding numbers and things. And the question then is, okay, that market that I've identified, that need, that problem in the market, and my solution, that interaction point where those two things come together, okay, and there's a price, okay, because
Mm-hmm.
I've identified what that market is going to pay, and I've identified what I believe I can charge, okay. At that point, am I going to make money? Am I going to be profitable at that point? And one of the challenges that we run into is, because we work in some really tough areas of the world, there is no local economy. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean,
Nothing to
there's
benchmark it or compare
oh
with.
my gosh, you know, because you've been in some of these areas. You've got there's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's a need, and I've got a product or a service that addresses that need, but the price that they're going to pay, that they are able to pay, is not going to cover my costs. I do not have a business. I'm going to be out of cash before I even start. And
Mm-hmm.
so now it becomes, okay, so where is a need that I can ship my product to? A lot of times we're shipping it from the 1040 window into Western Europe or into the States, to actually
Mm-hmm.
cover those costs, to have margin, to be able to, now we can maybe have a hybrid approach where we've got that model that's creating a profitable, sustainable company, but we don't want to walk away from the local economy either. So how do we bring those two things together? And that's why the understanding of the numbers, what you just said, we've got to be profitable, which obviously will allow us to be sustainable if we're going to have a real business, and we're going to be able to scale, and we're going to be able to grow and get the gospel to the people that we believe God is leading us to. So those are the things I think that, just from a numbers standpoint, businesses and practitioners and leaders who really, I'll never forget, years ago, I went to a business. This was one of the first businesses I went to. It was a long time ago, and it was in a tough area of the world. And it was about 120 degrees the day that I went there, and I had to go up this staircase kind of in the back of the building. And when I was going up there, I went through about 3 or 4 floors of factory workers in these, and it looked like, I mean, it looked like cages. It looked like I
Mhm.
was in. I
Mhm.
mean, it just people were just packed into these almost like cages. I mean, and I got up to the floor where this business was and opened the door, and there was air conditioning there, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is, I can't believe I'm in the same building. But I went into this business and I met the general manager, and I'll never forget it because I walked the floor with this guy, and he had, a lot of products that they were selling. But I remember asking him some questions. He was taking me through I just wanted to learn. And I was saying, so what products do you have that are your best sellers, and which ones, have the highest margin, and what kind of are the go-to products for you? Well, Jonathan, he knew every single product on that line. He knew the margins. He knew how many they had to sell every day to hit their number. I mean, every question that I asked him, it was like, this guy, if God forbid he gets hit by a truck, I hope they have this information, because this
Mhm.
guy knew everything about that business. Then he put on his different hat and he said, "Do you want to come to my staff meeting?" And he had about 100 workers there, and I said, "Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to see it." And I just went to the back. Well, this guy brought the team in, and he started to integrate scripture into this team meeting in such a non-threatening, profound way. You know, I just remember leaving there thinking, oh my gosh, when you see business's mission, when you see somebody who has the credibility to go along the, in on the factory floor and know as much or more than anybody else in that building, and then he can go and show the love of Jesus by the way that he coaches his team, by the way he leads his team, that's something special. It's really, really hard to do,
Mhm.
but when you see it happen, and he's brought a lot of people to Christ through that business, because the point of entry in, and this is any business we work with, the point of entry is, I need a job, like
Yep.
I need to feed my family. Um, there are things happening in my community, there's human trafficking issue. I mean, there's stuff that we can't even wrap our head around, and I need a job. I don't want anything to happen in my family, and my basic needs are not being met. And so you provide a job for that person, you get them in the door, and then you show them the love of Jesus by the way you lead the company, by the way you teach them and coach them and love on them. Pretty soon their questions are much different than just work, and this. But I think you got to get them in the door. You got to get the point of entry. And once you get them in there, then you've got established credibility by the way that you run the company, the way that you hold people accountable in a loving way. But people respect that, they really do.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard for you to be conscious when you're running a business, or even if you're not running a business. Let's say you're a manager or supervisor and you have people that
Yeah,
you work with, or even you're like in Philemon, right? People, workers, you have to look at your bosses and respect them and sort of try to do as if it's towards God. But it's hard sometimes to. It takes effort for you to get away just from the transactional relationship that you have. I
yeah,
give you a job, you
yeah,
work, I pay you, and move towards the transformative part.
yeah, yeah,
um, when I started in corporate, it was difficult because um, um, I was seen as a pariah, because I went into the BPO industry, call centers, and like 15 years ago, that was still something new here in the Philippines to a certain degree, especially in our
yeah,
in our in our space. And the industry was known to be full of drunkards and womanizers. So that's like because of the stress level that everyone was
yeah,
doing, and because a lot of them were unbelievers, they would spend most of their money, drinking and doing other stuff. So when I
yeah,
came in, I remember walking into a youth conference that I was a lecturer, invited as a lecturer. As I'm going to the stage, the pastor holding the mic said, "Hey, let's welcome Jonathan, our prodigal son. Maybe he can come back to the light." So it was difficult to
yeah,
to to make people understand that in and while I was in that industry, people were coming to me because I told them I'm not going to drink with you. You know, if you
Yeah.
want, I can hold the camera. I can take pictures of you so you can see what it looks like when you're drunk and passed out during team buildings. So I can do
Yeah.
that for you, but I won't drink with you. And I didn't do the whole isolationist type of things. Oh,
Yeah.
they're just going there for team building. They'll probably just get that. I'm not going there. So no, I have to be there. I have to be there, and I have to show the light. The what
That's
it
right.
means to be
Yeah.
the light is being the difference, right? This is how it looks like in the darkness in what you're doing right now. But there's a
Yeah.
version of it that is maybe it's a little better than what you think, right?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
eventually, when I had my own office, I would have people come and set schedules because they just want to talk about their relationship with their partners that they're having problems with, or ask advice, life advice. And then when I started noticing that, I said, oh, okay, transformative.
Yeah.
I've just gone past the transactional, now in transformative. And
Yeah.
nowadays,
Yeah.
even in some of the coachings that I do with my employees right now, sometimes our coaching sessions we don't even talk about work anymore. We're talking, hey, how are you doing? You know, and we talk. I was able to share the gospel with one of my uh, super long time friends that is one of my operations managers now, and I was able to share the gospel from beginning till end. It wasn't planned. It wasn't. It just
Wow.
came up in
Yeah.
conversation, and that gave me a spiritual high for a month and a half, I think. Whereas, oh
Oh yeah.
Lord, even if even she's probably listening to it because she's going to produce the podcast, but she, I even if my entire business, there is that feeling that my business has just turned 7 years. Even if the 7 years was
That's,
just to reach that one person, that I've
uh,
known for 14 years. And,
yeah.
if God had built up the business and it was just to save that one soul,
Yeah.
there's a huge, and I
Nothing
can't,
better. Yeah.
nothing better. And I can't imagine because I know that you deal with human trafficking and with other stuff, but, simple soul getting saved is like, wow. And then you have so much more. And I'll get to that. I have a question about bottom lines, but I have a question that I would like to
Yeah.
capture it
Yeah.
on record because I asked you this question before. There was a point in my business that I was super down, but then there was a point where it was looking like I was gonna shoot up like a rocket. It was gonna be extremely fine. And I asked you this question. I asked the question in the BNB session, and I don't know if you remember. You probably don't remember. But my question was, how do I know where is the line between being profitable and sustainable and being greedy?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was my question because I was worried because I have a structure of giving from our profit, and people that receive help that from directly from our profit aside from our own personal ministry. So I'm no longer as concerned as that because the more that I earn, the more we can give. but
Yeah.
but sometimes that is a problem, right? Especially
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
have Christian values. How do you know, or is there a line that between being profitable and looking for sustainability, building up savings and cash flow, and then being basically greedy and starting to sin in business?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the question of where, where is the line, right? The line is probably different for everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you what I think is really important, Jonathan. I think that, and one of the things that, and we'll talk a little bit about the quadruple bottom line, but it's a piece of that I think drives everything, and that is the acknowledgement up front, that this is not my business.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole idea of stewardship, right? I really believe with all my heart that this is what God wants us to do. He wants us to acknowledge the fact, you know, right when we're starting a business, that whatever happens with this business, that it's not my business, that I am simply a steward for Him. Now, what that does for all of us is imagine that if you really believe in your heart that you're the steward for God's business, then He's your boss, and
Mm-hmm.
He's the one you report to every day. And he knows when you're cutting corners. He knows when you're not. He knows everything about everything you're doing.
Hmm.
And so one of the words that we at IBEC really felt led to just focus on for the whole year. This is about 4 years ago. Was excellence, and excellence, but excellence for the right reason, right? Excellence because this is his business. We should be better than secular businesses. If
Yeah.
he's the boss, if he's the CEO, if he's the one if this is his business, everything we do should be better because this is
Mhm.
his. So I think the whole idea of stewardship is really important, and it kind of drives this idea of this question that you ask about where is the line between profitability, sustainability, and being greedy. And I think if we're truly acknowledging that this is his business, and the reason why do we want to be profitable? Why do we want to be sustainable? Why do we want this long-term viability in a company, right? Why is that? Well, if the answer to that in our heart, and we're the only ones that can answer that. This is just my opinion, so I don't pretend to have all the answers here. But if my answer is that, I'd really like to. We really need to get another house. We really want to live on the other side of because that's a better area. It's these
Mhm.
houses are nicer. I need a bigger car. But it's really not a need. It's more of a want. And so the whole idea of being profitable and sustainable in this business and this thriving business is because something that I something that I have in my life right now is missing, and it's typically a materialistic thing. And if
Mhm.
I'm starting to fall into that trap, then I'm getting into kind of a danger zone. Um, I think if you're looking at this and saying with all your heart that the reason that I want to be profitable and sustainable is because I want to reach as many people with the gospel as I possibly can. My dream, if I'm in this particular location, my dream is to build my company here, to build a model that's really successful, and then I really want to scale it and grow it to another part of this region because there's no believers in that region. This is where I think God wants me to go, but he wants me to go once I've proven those kinds of ideas. And
Mhm.
why are we growing, and why are we hiring more people, and why are we making more money, and why are we selling more product, and why are our revenue numbers growing like this? Well, I believe that if we're doing it for if we're doing it for a reason that glorifies God, that all comes down to the fundamental issue of stewardship, that this is his business, and my job is to utilize this gift that God has given me through this business to glorify him and to reach people who don't know him. then I think you're then I think you're going to operate in a safe zone. I really do. But I
Yeah.
think it can be very tricky. Like you say, I mean, where's the line? And I think once a person starts to feel like they're crossing the line, I think then the check in the spirit's got to, we've got to listen to our heart. We've got to kind of regroup, and that's why having somebody, I think, to talk through these issues with is
Yep.
just so important, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I one thing that I developed after I heard your answer about being careful of not being materialistic, about things and what the purpose really for growing the business, for earning more and to get more. I started asking myself that question: why
Yeah,
we had to purchase a bigger car because all my kids we're four
sure.
kids, so we had to purchase a bigger car, and that was a huge issue for us because we were concerned as to how people are going to see us coming from a sedan to an SUV. Will we look, is this a need? And we sort of started struggling with those questions. Also with the
Yeah,
house, we had to move houses as well during that time because we were getting our house was getting small. And but one thing that we I kept asking myself whenever I had a big purchase or a big financial decision, like, should we buy an SUV? And I kept on asking myself, really? I keep giving reasons why we should purchase this, why we should invest in this, and the next question is, really, really. And whenever that simple one word question is given, if I felt uncomfortable, I say, yeah, maybe the reason is not sufficient because if my
yeah.
argument can be dismantled by just one simple question, then maybe it's not for the right reasons. Um, but then let's go to the quadruple bottom line. So in your website,
Yeah, yeah,
you do mention about this, and I think that that's a great thing to talk about. I think we even have a post schedule for you on Friday, talking about the quadruple bottom line. So could you
yeah.
explain the concept a little bit, and how important it is for businesses, Christian businesses?
Yeah, yeah. So the question will come. This will kind of lead into it. So the question will come up to IBEC, to us. Um, how do you know if a business is a good fit? How do you know if a business is, if we're going to be able to provide value, if they're going
Mm-hmm.
to fit into really our sweet spot, and where we believe we can provide value. The first question we've got to ask is, okay, when we think of the quadruple bottom line, what I like to do is personalize it, to think about a business that seamlessly integrates the elements of the quadruple bottom line into what they do every day. Okay, so the first thing is, am I focused on profitability? Okay, just like what you were just talking about, Jonathan. So, and why am I doing that? Why do I want to be profitable? Well, I
Mm-hmm.
want to have a viable business. I want to be able to grow. I want to do it for the right reason. Okay, so we have to be profitable if we're going to have a long term business. So that's the first thing. The second is, and it feeds into the second one from the first, and that is the creation of jobs in the areas that we work is so critical. For many people, that newly created job can be the first step to salvation, because that was one of the things that really hit home with me, is when I went to some of the areas that I had never been to before for the first time. um, I went there, and I remember going there with this, just uncertainty. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know when I got off the plane what I was going to see. I did have a focus on telling people about Jesus. I said, God, when the opportunity opens up for me, please give me the discernment and the wisdom to say the right things. And I realized when I got into some of these areas that when little kids are starving to death and there's no jobs and all these other things are happening, it's hard for people to hear about Jesus
Mm-hmm.
when they're so far in the mud that they need their dignity, they need hope, they need encouragement, they need you need to pick them up and kind of dust them off and give them a chance. That was one of the key takeaways for me anyway. And so I said, well, how do you do that? How am I going to do that? what well, this is just, the magnitude of this problem is just overwhelming. But then, like so many in the business's mission world, we start focusing on job creation, economic
Mm-hmm.
development. Okay, because that's the thing that can change people's lives. When you go into these areas and there's 60, 70, 80% unemployment, I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's mind-boggling how people can even live day to day. And so the second piece of that quadruple bottom line is that job creation piece, which is really important. The third, and this is I think important for the listeners out there too, is that when we run businesses, when we lead businesses, when we coach businesses, we've got to have the mindset that we're not just Christians running businesses. Okay, and the reason I say that is, okay, let's say we took two leaders of companies. One was secular and one was Christian. And
Mm-hmm.
we said, okay, give me five things that are important to you when you're hiring people for your company, and kind of the culture of your company. Well, they'd probably both say, I want hardworking people. I want people who are on time. I want people who I can trust. I want people who are great team players. And I want people who are loyal to the company, something like that. Well, here's a Christian, here's a secular leader. They're probably both going to think the same way in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways. Okay. However, if I'm a believer, and I've gone through this whole idea, like we're talking about stewardship, this is not my business. What does that mean? And I get up every day and I say, you know what, God, my job today is to go to work and try to make disciples for you and for your kingdom. Whether it's in my company, whether it's the customers that I'm working with outside the company, whether it's the vendors, whether whoever it is, whoever you put in my path, please take the blinders off. And if I have that intentional mindset, as you know, opportunities will open. It's like when we get up in the morning and we say, God, I'm giving this day to you. Open my eyes to what you put in front of me. It's amazing what happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have that intentional mindset, I mean, you get off on rabbit trails in the day of in a business day. You're chasing things down that mean nothing. but it's really that believer making disciples. So that's the third pillar of the quadruple bottom line. The last is the stewardship piece. And a lot of times you'll hear environmental stewardship, you'll hear creation care, which is really, the recognition of God's creation, and that is so vitally important. But there's also other aspects of the business, right? If we have the blanket of the idea of stewardship just in totality, that everything in this business is meant to glorify God, then we're going to have the best HR department. We're going to have the best sales and marketing team. We're going to have the best customer service team. We're going to show the love of Christ when there's problems within the company. If there's, God forbid, if there's somebody that we have to let go in the company, how do we do it with dignity? How do we do it with compassion? Is it somebody that wants to work for our company? They're just in the wrong job. Can we find something? These are the things that we think about if we have that idea of this is God's business and we need to glorify Him in everything that we do. And so those are really, and what I like to see in a company, Jonathan, is not these terms on a PowerPoint spreadsheet, on a presentation, and they're just there. I like to see, how does the company kind of live and breathe these concepts? How does everything within that company, the DNA of the company, reflect those four things? And if we drive with those, if we focus on those four things, then I think we're going to drive a company to the point where we're reflecting God in not only a strong business, but more importantly in the ministry. Because really, the business is the ministry. That's the key.
Mhm. I, one of the things that I was given the opportunity to start my own business, and
Yeah, yeah,
one of the reasons why I accepted that opportunity and I thought this is actually good was because I was on the BPO industry, and it's a tough industry
yeah,
because for our clients like big telco companies in the US and etc., us here in the Philippines are numbers.
yeah,
Thank God that AI came 15 years after I've done corporate, because if AI was available at that time, we'd probably not have be here right now.
yeah,
But the thing that I was sort of learning, because when I started working, the first thing is that, oh, it was for survival. The reason why I started working corporate was because me and my wife had nothing to eat anymore, like literally nothing to eat. I went to a job fair at McDonald's because we were promised that we'd get a chicken sandwich if we just applied. So I told my wife, because she just got laid off, I just got laid off. Our ministry was not paying for enough for us to eat, and I said, hey, we need lunch right now. Let me go. I'll apply. I can speak English, and I'll bring
yeah.
back the chicken sandwich. So that's how the beginning of it. But
Wow.
then I found
Yeah,
out. Then I found out that, well, I came in for survival, but I'm learning so much that it's looking like I'm thriving. I was lucky because I was in customer support, so helping people in the ministry can take a long time before you see fruits and see appreciation,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
in customer support, every 15 minutes I was getting people connected to the internet, and they were so happy. So there was this sense that I'm helping people. But then I started noticing, trying to learn everything that it is in outsourcing, and there were industry standard practices that I I wasn't comfortable with.
yeah,
Like, it was very common for people to be shouted out. It was very common for people to use like swear words because it's harder for you to transform somebody. Um, there's this sermon by Pastor Vodi Balkam. I don't know if you've heard about
mm,
him, but he talks about belief versus behavior, and the same thing in church and same thing also in corporate. If you keep hitting the behavior and trying to fix the behavior and fix the behavior, it's
yeah,
easy, but you have to keep doing over and over again. And then,
yeah,
but if you change the belief, it takes a while for you to change the belief, but it's one time change and then the behavior follows, right? The problem there was that the industry standard was keep hitting them on the behavior. The problem
yeah.
is that people get immune with from times, and they
Oh
need
yeah,
more and more. So the shouting became louder, the things became more abusive, and then if the guy wasn't taking the abuse, they would resign or get fired.
Yeah.
And that was one of the big things that it was very difficult for me to to agree with that. And I started my own business, and I said, this is one of the things that I am going to try my hardest not to. It took a while for me
Yeah.
to to try to shave that off, but you know, I'm proud that part of the sort of the onboarding and people are explaining and things.
Yeah.
uh but my manager say, hey, Jonathan doesn't like that. You know, whatever you're bringing from your previous experience, it's different here. I'll give you an
Yeah.
example. um, People sometimes make mistakes, right? Make mistakes, and then we call out the mistakes. You know, the design did not follow the brand, for example, or you know, there was this rendering, there's the, you render this video and the entire thing we can't use. And so people say, don't worry sir, I'll remove the billing from it, right? And you don't have to pay me for that. And that's one thing that I don't like. It's common in
Yeah.
other places. You know, it's common in other places. If you make a mistake, you get paid for that. And I said, no, I will not bill the client for this, but I'll pay you for your mistake. I'll pay you for mistake. Just don't make it again,
Yeah.
because
Sure.
eventually people can be very easy to say, if I make a mistake, I won't charge it, and that's just,
Yeah.
they just, okay, throw it under the rug. But if they still get paid, it's a little bit different, because they, hey, wait, John actually values my growth, values that I make a
Yeah.
mistake, and that's part of the thing. So yeah, I understand
Yeah.
what you were talking about there, and I really appreciate you mentioning that. I think that the next thing that the question is, now that you have that business plan, you have like that the values in place, you have the desire to go into missions and do that through business. Um, Here in the Philippines, we normally think about selling stuff, pieces of land, you know, just to raise
Yeah.
capital and things like
Yeah.
that. But in the US, it's more common to have investors, right?
Yeah.
Just in recent years, I knew what an angel investor was, what a venture capitalist, and you know what first round, second round, seed round, and all of that, what those actually meant. Um, with IBEC being able to help new business owners start businesses, mission oriented, kingdom oriented businesses. What's one of the things that that investors are looking at, uh, not only in the business but also in the practitioner?
Yeah. Yeah. So so let's talk about there's two different businesses that we'll work with that are trying to position themselves for investment. One is pre-revenue, and one is a business that's been around for a while. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so when we're talking about the pool of investors, obviously there's investors. There a lot of investors. They want to see revenue. you
Yep.
know, it's like I want to mitigate my risk. I want to come back in 2 or 3 years once you get your business going, and then I'll be interested in investing in your business. The pre-revenue investor, there's not as many of them, and so maybe to answer your question here, Jonathan, let me kind of talk a little bit about businesses that are trying to raise money to launch a business, which can be pretty difficult because you've got a smaller pool of investors that you're actually targeting. You want folks that are willing to take that risk, and so they don't have the luxury of falling back on on
Mm-hmm.
revenue and run rates and growth and customers in place and things like that. And so I think some of the things that we've talked about already are going to be really important in the eyes of investor. Okay, one is going to be, is this a one person show? Are you doing this on your own, or who's the team around you? What are
Mm-hmm.
the qualifications of the team? What are the track records? Have you ever do you have a business pedigree? Have you ever done this before? Have you ever run a business before? If so, then obviously that track record is going to be really important in establishing credibility. The knowledge of the industry that one is participating in, if there's a background there, obviously that's important. I think for the investor, I think the business acumen, just and sometimes it can be an obvious, if somebody's run multiple businesses and they've got that business acumen, there's something that you can touch and feel. but sometimes you got to rely on the intangibles. Maybe
Mhm.
that background isn't there yet. Maybe this is something that I, as an investor, have to really peel back the layers. And is there something about this person that I believe is going to show me that they can make this business work, i.e., they've been through some really difficult situations in their life and they're not a quitter. They do not quit. They've, and some of the people that we meet in some of these parts of the world, I mean, their whole life has been a matter of survival. And so I remember a young man that I started working with. I'm still working with him probably 4 years ago, 3 years ago. He had never pitched to an investor ever, and had never run a business before. And we ended up getting him a loan to start a business, and this business in a really tough area of the world right now. He turned a profit in the first 6 months. He hired 4 young men. They're preaching in churches. They've become an inspiration to other young men in their community. But I look back at him and I say, okay, why was he able to secure this loan? Well, his life story was all about clawing and scratching and just surviving, you know. And I think
Mhm.
that really played into the minds of the investor. So I think that's another thing. I think we talked a little bit earlier about proper due diligence on the market. Like, tell me about why you think this product is going to success, or this service will successfully launch in the market that you've identified. Do they really have they really uncovered the market? Do they understand the competition? Do they we work a lot with lean canvas, because lean canvas is just a one page. It's a way to expose weaknesses really quickly, and it tells you pretty quickly about the knowledge of the practitioner of the market that they're going into. And so we really like that. So that's another thing. I think, again, if we're talking expats, we're talking about language and culture. um, you know they've identified what kind of capital they need. Do they really understand their costs? It always costs more than what people think it's going to cost. I mean, there's always
Mhm.
hidden costs in there. Have they invested their own capital in there? Do they have skin in the game? That's another thing I think that's really important for investors. Um, the other thing that became really important when COVID happened was, is there a backup plan? What do you do as far as pivoting your business if something like that were to happen again? If something unforeseen happened to your business? So if it's a business that just did a pitch about 2 weeks ago, and it was a retail boutique shop that we're raising money for, and the question came up from the investment group about, what are you going to do as far as pivoting your business if things change, and are you going to change your model? And she's building an online strategy, right from the get go. They're going to be selling online. They've got their customer base. They've got it inside the retail store, but then also outside as well. They're
Mhm.
going right to the consumer. So that was thought of very highly by the investor, because they had already thought about that. And then I think that the last thing that's really important when we're talking about kingdom investors, there has to be an intentional focus on that ministry plan. And just
Mhm.
what we were talking about before, when I'm pitching to an investor that's on the kingdom side, and this is the kind of person that I want to pitch to because this is the kind of business I have, then I've got to really illustrate that my business is my ministry, that this business is all about bringing people to Christ. And all the other elements of the quadruple bottom line are going to be seen in my business, but there will be no distinction between the business and the ministry. They are one and the same, you know.
Mhm.
So those are just some of the things I think that from an investment standpoint, um, they're really important. The other thing, just to kind of add to that a little bit, when we work with investors, and for those folks that are out there right now thinking about pitching to investors, we
Or
always
starting
tell
your
them,
own business, right?
yeah, yeah, we always tell them, no more than 20 minutes, no more than a dozen slides. Um, the beginning of that, if and that's really hard to do. You're pitching your business in, less than 20 minutes. And always tell them, you've got to grab that investor at the beginning of your pitch. You've got to get them excited. If you're not excited about I did a workshop it was actually last year at a large conference, And the question that was kind of driving this workshop is, does an investor invest in the jockey or the horse?
Mm,
And in essence, do they bet on the practitioner or the business, if they had to pick one over the other? And that the consensus is really, it's about the jockey, it's about the person, because I am the most important person. I am the most important product in my bag is me. And so if I'm pitching, I'm always telling these men and women that are pitching, you got to sell yourself. You got to get them locked in. You got to get them excited about you in that first couple of minutes. And then through the course of the presentation, you can't lose them. And then on the back end, you've got to close. You've got to give them three reasons to invest in your business, what they're going to remember about your presentation. There's got to be something that when they get done with that presentation and they're thinking about what you just did, they're remembering two or three things, why I'm going to invest. And so those are really hard things to do. But this is, we just want to help people, when they're trying to raise capital. I mean, we know investors are always looking, kingdom investors are looking for solid businesses that are having an impact for Christ, and businesses are always looking for capital, and sometimes they need somebody like us that can connect the two, and bring them
mhm.
together and make that introduction. So
Yeah, and going through the whole preparation, because we did that exercise as well in the past, and going through that whole preparation, regardless if you get the investment or not, the whole preparation, and if you're very honest with yourself, it's super important. And I
yeah,
remember that was one of the lowest points in my life during that time. And
yeah,
I went through the den, and that we I wasn't as successful as I wanted, but I did take note of everything. And I say, okay, there was this question. I talked with John Jones, with Jono, and with
yeah,
yourself, and
yeah,
I took note of everything. Okay, I could have done this. This wasn't clear, and this one thing that I started working really hard after that,
yeah,
because my business was just 3 years old at the time.
uh-huh,
Uh, but one of the things that we work is finding really what our differentiator was. So,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
what our differentiator was, because my business is in a space that I have millions of competitors. And
yeah,
I have competitors that have millions of employees, and I have competitors that are freelancers. The single
yeah,
person with a single computer is still a competitor of mine. So what makes us different? And that was one of the things that we really really worked on. And I also had to work on finding the executor, the person that will execute the plan, because during that time I was sort of solo. I
oh
was
yeah,
I was alone in the battlefield for most of the time. But uh but yeah, it was absolutely IBEC Ventures and you and everybody involved during that time is was an amazing help for me during that time. And I'm so glad that I can count you as a friend, and also
yeah,
potentially business partner in the future, and a client actually, or not just
yeah,
for, even
totally,
if just for
yeah,
social media. But
yeah, yeah,
yeah. So Bob, just to close
yeah,
things out,
sure.
do you have a story? I don't know if this is a personal story, a story about one of
Mm.
your clients, or anything that you could share with us about any that we discussed today, that relates to anything that we discussed today.
Yeah, well, I could go down so many pathways. I've so enjoyed this time with you, Jonathan. I really believe in it because I've seen it work. I've seen businesses mission work. Maybe I'll share just a quick story about myself, and maybe you know a transformation that I've gone through. And the reason I think I'm going to focus on this is I think there's other men and women out there right now that are probably on the sidelines, maybe listening to this and saying, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And so, as I mentioned, my story, when I got out of business school, I fell into this biotech world. I didn't strategically plan it. God just put me there, and I really liked it. I really fell in love with it, and that's all I did for close to 30 years. Um, but I was a Sunday Christian. You know, I was a Sunday Christian, man. I tell you, I was working really, really long hours for many, many years, traveling a lot. And I just remember going to church on Sunday, and my prayer was that this pastor was going to say something that would miraculously refuel my tank for another 6 days so I could just get through the week. You know, I'm kind of embarrassed to say that, but I'm just being transparent and honest because I do think that there's a lot of people out there that are probably
Yeah.
shaking their head and going, "That's me right now." So I would show up and just pray that God would give me a word through my pastor, who, the pastor. We had a number of pastors because we moved, but it was kind of an unfair request on my part because they had never been in business. They had never some of the
Mhm.
things that I was praying for, or even talking to some of them offline. It was That's why I think a coach from like an IBEC is so important because it's we're kind of wired the same and we're talking a lot of times we can we're like, man, I'm going through this, oh, I am too, and so there's that commiseration in a positive way with a believer. But anyway, I was going through this, but about 20 years ago, I'll never forget this. I was on the leadership team in this company, and I think I was the only believer, uh, but I wasn't doing any of the stuff that we're talking about right now. It was
Mhm.
very secular company. But we had and I still see her in my mind. We had a janitor that worked for us. Her name was Annie. Annie was the janitor, and I remember that I remember that I was in the lunchroom a number of times, and Annie would come in, and it was like Annie was invisible. Nobody paid attention to her. Um, God just put it on my heart that I was always tried to be nice to her. I just tried to be nice to her, and wasn't like I was trying to do anything for Christ. I guess I just wanted to emulate Christ and reflect Him. But I just always talked to her and stuff, and I always thought to myself, man, I think I'm the only one that talks to her. I think I'm the only one that even knows she's here. And so one day, I used to always go for a walk at lunch, and just to get out, just to kind of clear my head. And there was a little sandwich shop around the corner. I'd kind of walk down there and get a sandwich, and just say, okay, we'll go back for second half here, the second half of the. That's how it was. It was just, and I wasn't responsible for global sales, so it was it was live and breathe a number. That was all I did. But when I was walking to lunch one day, I there was a hedge right alongside the building, and I could hear these voices on the other side of the hedge, and I thought, who's out there?
Mhm.
I didn't even know there was an atrium. There was kind of an atrium there that I realized after that, but I was thinking, what's going on over there? And God just put it on my heart, said, well, go check it out. So I kind of went over and I kind of peeked through the hedge, and there was Annie, the janitor, leading a Bible study in my company. And I just, I just shook my head and I just thought, man, here I am. I mean, I could do something like this. And I reported to the CEO, and I had one person that could control my fate. But, if he wasn't around, I could have done a lot of things that Annie couldn't do. Annie was at the bottom of the
Mhm.
totem pole from a title standpoint. But it just showed me that she was much more of a believer, much more of a true Christian than I was, because she
Mhm.
was she was there doing God's work. And I think about her again. This is like 20 years later, and it just still it just I think that's when God started to work on me for business's mission. I had no idea I was going to be leading IBEC. I had no I did I didn't know what God God's path was. But I think that was in when I look back, sometimes we look back at our life and 20 years ago, something happened.
S-
like, like,
Sometimes it's very small, right? Sometimes it's very
well, like that,
small.
like here's this, and I'll see her in heaven someday and I'm going to thank her. But, I think about what was my takeaway from that experience. Well, that positions and titles, they mean nothing in the eyes of the Lord, right?
Hmm.
Nothing. It's all about serving. That's one thing. I think the second is being a disciple in the workplace is about being intentional and wanting to do it. There should be no excuses. And
Hmm.
I had excuses. I mean, I had excuses. What if this happens? What if what if all this stuff? And so that's the second thing that Annie taught me. And I think the last is just the humility. It's an amazing gift from God, and it's a reflection, I think, of
Hmm.
Jesus. And I just, so that's a story. I guess I try not to forget that one, Jonathan. I have no idea where she is, but I think about serving, and I think about so many men and women out there today that don't know about what it means to be a disciple for Christ. It's
Hmm.
not their fault. I was one of them. If you asked me before I got into business's mission, Bob, when you leave here, when you leave the church today, what are you going to do this week to be a disciple for Jesus? My you would have got. I don't know what I would have said. I would have said well, I'm going to be a good person. I'm going to be nice to, all the things that my upbringing had brought. But what's the intentional focus this week to make disciples for Jesus? I never brought my faith into the workplace. And I think about, how many times over the years that that in church I've had the the privilege of seeing missionaries come back to church and tell their story. I mean, it's these
Hmm.
people, they're our heroes. They're on the front lines, they're in the trenches, they're doing amazing things. But having said that, I would have loved to have seen a pastor bring a business person up to the pulpit and say, Jonathan, tell us about how you made disciples in the workplace this week. What did you do? You've got a story to share. And I think that type of message, you're going to have many, many people in the pews going, I can do that. I can do that. Just like I didn't know I could do that. How do I do that? Where's my on ramp? That's why, people out there are looking to get involved. IBEC Ventures is a great, great on ramp. There are others as well. But the point is that whether you're in the States, you're in the Philippines, you're in the 1040 window, no matter where you are, our job as believers through the Great Commission is to tell the world about Jesus. And if our sphere of influence is going to work and we're working, these god awful hours all week long, and we're there all week, and we're not telling people about Christ or trying to reflect Christ, what an opportunity that we're losing. And so
Yeah.
so that's so I just, if anything, anytime I talk to others that are maybe in the same boat that I was in before, man, I can relate, and I just tell them, just dip your toe in the water. You don't have to quit your job. You've got to provide for your family. I'm not saying that, but you got to get yourself around people like us, because we are one big,
Hmm.
it's like a big Bible study. It's like we're all workers for Christ, and we're all here to encourage one another. And there's a lot of opportunity out there that we're not taking advantage of, I think, for the kingdom.
Yeah. From the perspective of somebody that's seen both sides,
Yeah.
like, um, what you just described, going to church and not being filled, or not being fed the meal that you're looking for. I think that that is such a big truth right now in the church. And I think that, like I said in the beginning of the episode, is that there is there is such an amount of talent and resources right now sitting in the pews that are not
Oh,
giving enough. But sometimes, and a lot of times, is because the pastor is afraid of getting into this whole universe of business, that he has no idea how to tackle, right? And then there's also the business people that might feel some shame in sharing some of the challenges that they have, because a lot of the
Yeah.
challenges that they have are financially related, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so there is this like obstacle in between. I think if anything, that our listeners could get from this is to break that divide. Anything that our
Yeah.
listeners can get from this conversation is break that divide. Start if you really want to, and it's you're in a place, for example, that does not have IBEC Ventures readily available, does not have other Christian business that have a business's mission in mind. you know be honest with your pastor, right? Tell your
Yeah.
pastor what your need is, tell us what your challenges are, and then the pastor might be able to sort of start to look for and understand more who his audience is, who his congregation is, and be
Yeah.
preparing spiritual meals that are more fit to what you need. Because sometimes it's hard for us to prepare the meal and we don't know what the
Oh yeah.
allergies are, what the likes are, and what
Yeah. Yeah.
things like that. And I'm very thankful, Bob, for you making time.
Oh
This
yeah. This has been really good for me, Jonathan. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. It's the concept of business as mission is one that me and my family practice a lot in the past out of necessity. It's a difference. There's a difference between practicing something as a necessity and practicing something because you want to make an impact uh,
Yeah.
in the ministry that God has given us, and becoming true stewards of it. My mom told me when I started my business, and there were a lot of questions. And then I was expecting my parents, because both of them are missionaries. I was expecting both of my parents to say, John, really? Aren't you going to be a full time missionary or something?" My mom said, "John, our God is a rich God, super rich. All of the treasures of the world are His, but they are the wrong hands. So if you're called to go and grab some of that riches and use it in the right way, go." And I haven't looked back since.
Wow. Boy, that's yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's
so
that's amazing wisdom because again, it kind of goes back to you asked so many good questions today, Jonathan. But I do think that one of the things that is so important is that if we how are we going to get to people and tell them about Jesus if we don't think about creating economic development and jobs? And it just you can't go into these areas as missionaries now. Many parts of the world you can't do that, but people all over the world have the same basic needs, right? I mean, people who have families, they want the best for their families. They want to be able to provide for their families. They want to be able to provide meals for their. And if there's no jobs, people do desperate things, get
mhm,
backed into a corner. And, we shake our heads and we say, how in the world could somebody do that? Well, um, not validating it by any stretch, but when people are desperate, they do desperate things. And if you go up the food chain and go upstream and figure out, okay, how did this happen? How are these things happening down here? In many cases, it's because there are no jobs,
yeah,
and we've got to create jobs for people, and we've got to show them how we can love them through providing work and employment and dignity and hope and encouragement.
amen, amen. So we'll include all of the links for LinkedIn, for the
Okay.
website,
Yeah.
on the show notes. Do you have anything else or anything coming up in terms for IBEC that you our listeners to be plugged into?
The only other thing that I would add, Jonathan, is we talked a lot here today about how tough it is to start businesses, existing businesses as well. But boy, when you're talking about starting a business from scratch, it's really really hard. And our good friend Mike Bear, you and I and Mike and we all get together every week. But I remember about 10 years ago, Mike and I, were talking and we said, we got to do something for people starting a business. And we said it's just really really hard, but we said you've got training and equipping and we've got coaches, And most of these people need some capital, you know. So if we can bring those three things together in the form of a business's mission launchpad, we got to do it. We've got to, we've got to launch something like this. And so Mike and I launched it in 2019 back in Romania, and it's called TriVenture. But TriVenture is something that there's a lot of free courses in there. Mike is really, he is the best at training and equipping because he's been doing this for a long time, and Mike is like you. He's a pastor and a very,
Mm-hmm.
very successful business person. So he can go deep on both sides of the ledger, and just a tremendous teacher. And so we've got his teaching, our coaching, and we've got a capital arm. So I would just say anybody out there who's thinking about starting a business, go in and check out TriVenture. There's a lot of free courses in there, and we'll connect that way too. And we just want to help you. So yeah, that'd be another. I think that's another asset for people right now if they're thinking about starting a business.
Awesome. Awesome. We'll add that to all the links. So thank you,
Hey,
Bob, and God
thank you,
bless you.
Jonathan. God bless you.
Bye
You
bye.
betcha. Thank you. Bye bye.